Hello and welcome to another week of Ask an Author with Julia Kelly, where I am really excited because I have a friend and debut author with me today. Would you like to introduce yourself and your wonderful book?
Oh, thank you, Julia. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am Elizabeth Thompson, and my book, Lost in Paris, just launched. I guess it's been about a week and a half ago now, and I can't believe my baby's finally out in the world.
It always feels wonderful to have worked on something for so long and then finally have it in readers' hands and to start seeing readers come back and tell you what they think about it. It's really exciting and also a little scary sometimes.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
Well, perhaps we should start with, what this book is about and what readers can expect when they pick this book up, which I know they will.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, well, it's a dual timeline book. So it's part of it is set present day, of course. And then the other part is set in the interwar period between World War I and World War II, edging right up to the start of World War II. And it's Paris in the 20s and 30s. And it's just a good time. And
It is a good time.
and it's about a mother and daughter who are estranged, and they discover that they have jointly inherited an apartment in Paris from the family matriarch, and they knew nothing of this apartment or of her history in Paris. And so they end up having to work together to kind of get to the bottom of this mystery of like, this is, this whole other side of the grandmother and great grandmother that they never even knew of, because they knew of her as this very straight-laced, sort of quiet, introverted sort of woman who, but then they find a whole different life.
They really do. She is layered and she's lived a lot of life, which I think will be really exciting to people as they discover her story. So that her story is revealed in another timeline. And perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that timeline.
Yes, it is. It spans from, it starts in 1927 and goes up through June-ish of 1940. Starts in London, and she's British, and she is an aspiring fashion designer. So she has a dream that she's going to go to Paris and she's going to apprentice at the atelier of Chanel. And she actually gets an appointment or for an interview to go in, and it does not go as planned. So against her family's wishes, she's gone to Paris, and this is back in the in the late 20s. So that was it was just starting to open up for women to where they were freer, but not so much, in some households. And so she took a chance, and when she went, she knew that it was not one of those things where, okay, it didn't work, I can go home now. So she had to really kind of go with a plan B.
She did, what a plan B it is, because she meets some pretty recognizable and incredible figures along the way.
She becomes friends with Zelda Fitzgerald. I'm kind of obsessed with Zelda Fitzgerald. She's just what an interesting kind of tortured life, but she was a fun character to research and write. And there's also appearances by Hemingway and, of course, Scott Fitzgerald and Picasso, to name a few, and Gertrude Stein. So you get that whole sort of expat, interwar Paris community, which was really fun. It was just so fun to dive into it and then to write about it.
Absolutely. There is so much in this book and it is so rich. And I'm already seeing some comments from people. Please do comment and also ask questions. A couple of people always pop up and say where they're watching from, which is really fun. Diane is watching from Michigan, and she said, I just finished reading this amazing book this afternoon. I loved the whole story. And I think that was my experience with it too. I was very lucky in that I got to read this book pretty early, last year, actually. And I just felt like it's one of those wonderful dual timeline books where you're swept away by the mystery in the present day and you're swept away by the mystery in the past, and how those two things come together is just really wonderfully done. So there's a lot that we can talk about with this, and we will talk a lot about this. But I do want to remind you guys that if you do have questions, please do drop them into the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on things. So I think it's hard to think of this book without thinking of the fantasy of the apartment. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about how you came across that idea and what your inspiration for that part of the story was in terms of the present day.
Absolutely. I was completely enthralled with the discovery of Madame de Florian's apartment that was discovered. It was actually discovered in 2010, and it had the first stories that came out were that it had been sitting vacant since 1940, and they found it, opened it up, and it was lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, like honestly, like somebody had closed the door in 1940 and then came back and, or I mean, did not come back. And, you know, when they opened it, it was just as if they had stepped out. So it was really like a time capsule. So of course that captured my imagination. And I just kept thinking, what if, you know, what if you discovered it? What if you, you know, what if you inherited it? And the story of that apartment has been told before, so I didn't want to retell or rehash, you know, Madame de Florian's story. But I thought I just used it as a springboard, and I started thinking, what if, you know, what if, and who would inherit this? And at the same time, I had the character Hannah, who's the main point of view character in the present day storyline. And I thought to myself, you know, you just kind of think, you know, as a writer, you think about who is your character and what is like the strangest thing you could put them through, or maybe even the most harrowing thing. And for her, it was having to work with her mother, who she has not had a good relationship with her whole life, unfortunately. Marla is the mother, and she's a very tortured character. And I thought, you know, that's something that you can't just turn your back. You can't say, and especially because of some things in Marla's history and so forth, she couldn't really trust her to say, yeah, go figure it out, and then you know, get back to me. So,
Be responsible and do all the logistical and legal things. It doesn't really work.
No. And then there was also, you know, so I just really went through sort of the, you know, walking through what would happen. First of all, since neither of them had actually been there to see it, it's okay. First of all, is it still standing? Which in Paris, you know, there's a good chance that it is, since they, you know, really cherish, you know, historical architecture and so forth. But there's a chance that there could be squatters. There's a chance that it could have somehow been sold along the way, or, you know, what are the chances of some, you know, something
Right.
just being there waiting for you? So they go with these trepidations, and Marla is all like, "Oh yeah, sure, you know, let's dive right in." And
He's very eager.
and Hannah, of course, is the voice of reason. So I loved playing with that too. The you know, a mother and daughter, kind of the roles were reversed, where the daughter's the responsible one and the mother is the more impetuous, sort of, you know, leaping and then looking and thinking of the consequences later. So
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting too, because you get a sense of what I think is a very true sense of what it would be like to walk into one of those really, as you said, time capsule museum pieces, where at first it must be wonder, and then, oh my goodness, how am I going to handle this? And you spend some time with them having to go through the flat and make it even possible to be in there without, you know, masks and eye protection on, which, you know, it feels very familiar in some ways, but this is heavy duty cleaning masks that we're talking about. There's grunt work. They have to sort of earn this apartment that they've inherited in a way as well. So it must have been interesting kind of having to think through, okay, if this happened to me, what would I do?
right, right. And so I thought about it, you know, from that regard, because you know, I think your first thought is going to be excitement. I just want to get in there and see everything. But then when you open the door and there's cobwebs and dust and spiders and you know, how would you do that? You know, I mean, how would you deal with that much dust? And so, you know, they kind of work through that, and a person with who may or may not have ulterior motives kind of steps in and helps them out. So
Yes. Well, and it's interesting because you have this kind of moment of discovery and process of discovery for these two women in present day, for Hannah and Marla. And then you also have a different type of discovery, but but one as well in the past with Ivy. Is that right? Uh,
Yes.
so Ivy's story is a little different. She has had a rejection in trying to become a fashion designer and trying to get a job, and then she just has to figure things out, right?
Yes. Yes. And she is, she's a Brit, and she has moved to, she's moved to France. Her grasp of French is minimal at best. And so she and I get that. I studied French actually through college, and still, when I go to Paris, I know what it's like to, to feel illiterate, basically, and after I'm there a little while, within probably like the end of my vacation there, I'm like, okay, I'm getting it. My ears tuning in, and so forth. But so she was dealing with that, and she also, what's she going to do, and so, she goes, kind of back and forth through, I'm not going to give up. I need to figure this out, and I need to just really, she kind of finds out what she's made of, and kind of what she will do in order to have to keep going home, and living the life that she doesn't want to live. So it's a matter of, do I, work hard, and figure it out so that I can make this dream come true. And what is the dream now? Am I going to, obviously the Chanel possibility didn't work out. Am I going to let that define me and crush me, or am I going to, figure out what to do, and so forth? And there's also a big, it's very important to her not to have to rely on anybody else, that she can do this for herself, so that she's not just left high and dry. So
Yeah. And I think it's so fascinating because I know I'm always drawn to stories about women at a crossroads. They can make one decision or they can make another decision, and their life is going to be very different. And I think in this case you have three women who are having to make those decisions. What is it about those types of stories that you think draws us in so much? Why do we keep coming back to these sort of women at a moment in their lives where they're really going to be defined by what they do next?
I think as women, we all have those moments where we're at a crossroad, and you can look at, the road not taken, and think about, what if, what if I had gone in this other direction? What if I had, or you can look at it in another way and think, wow, okay, I pushed myself and I grew. And I think it's probably the growing, that I know that's what attracts me to a story like that, is kind of, seeing that there's always a way. And I think, you can probably relate to this too, Julia, in publishing. I mean, it's we're writers, so that's what we do. That's what we know. And that's, we have these stories that we have to tell. And we're fortunate to be able to do that. But I think it takes a lot of digging deep in order to, to have the courage to put your story out there, and to take the chance of is not only is the publisher going to like it, but how is it going to be received by the reader? So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Publishing is very rarely a straight path for many people.
Right.
I think really if you dig down deep, most authors will tell you there was a moment of change in their career, whether it was before they were even published, when they were very well known and published. We've all seen authors pivot and do different things. I've done that during my career. I
Mhm.
think it's natural because we hope for long and healthy careers, and of course we're watching characters who we want to have long and healthy lives as well. And I think there's always moments where you have to consider things and really decide who you are and how that's going to shape you.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's kind of what Ivy went through too, is, okay, all right, I've hit a speed bump here. I've hit a am I going to make this a speed bump or a brick wall, basically? And personally, I'm always a believer in there's always a way. If you want something badly enough, you'll find a way. You'll find a way. And so that's what she's up against.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting also because Marla is going through that as well through this story.
Yes.
She has a very strained relationship with her daughter, and her daughter has a right to be suspicious of her mother's intentions. And I think in some ways it's so tender and so heartbreaking to watch that play out. But we end up rooting for these characters because they are complicated and because they have made mistakes in the past, and they need to, I don't necessarily want to say atone, but they need to sort of take what they've learned and decide to go a different route.
Exactly, exactly. Yes, Marla has many regrets just on how, but then we also find out too later on that not everything is as it seems. So, Marla may seem like a major flake in the beginning, but give her a chance, because there's more there than first meets the eye.
And those are always the best characters, right? Somebody who starts out one way and you can really trace the course of their development from point A to point B. They really grow and change throughout the course of the story. I think it's a wonderful thing to watch, and it's something that we absolutely see throughout this book with all of your characters. But I think Marla is something special, certainly.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes she is her own worst enemy too, though. So sometimes you're like, oh, come on.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I'm really curious because I know I think we called ourselves beforehand step into the story sisters.
Yes, exactly.
Yep, which is a reader group that really focuses on research, and also we have some video chats, and we share that with a group of authors. And you are the brainchild of this is your idea.
It belongs to all of us, but yes, I feel so fortunate to be part of this wonderful group of just incredibly talented women, and Julia is one of them, and also Brene Ryan and Madeline Martin and Eliza Knight, and we all are just great big research nerds. We love it. It's getting lost in that research, which is what we have to do for our stories, because and I think you have to really love doing the research and getting lost in that research in order to make a story authentic. And so we share, we talk books, but we try to post every day just about some sort of research that we've done, or some sort of historical I don't want to call it fact, but historical thing that we have found interesting.
Absolutely.
So,
and I have a confession to make. I missed my day. I normally post on Tuesdays, but I missed it. So I'm going to make it up this weekend, and I have an idea of what I want to do. So
we're a friendly group and so forth. Exactly. So it's fine. Nope, you're going Saturday this week, not Tuesday.
Well, that was going to be my next email. But I wanted to bring up Step Into the Story in the Facebook group, because one of the things that really stands out with this book is the research, because it's not just in the apartment and the present day, which I think sometimes people forget, that when you're an author, you do still need to research contemporary stories, because
yes, absolutely.
I certainly haven't done all the jobs or lived all the places that my characters live, although I do write about a lot of journalists, so maybe that's a little truth there. But really, in developing this historical world, there was just such wonderful detail. So could you tell us a little bit about kind of your research process for this book? Did you jump in early, or did you kind of do things as you were going?
I jumped in early, because I had I knew that I wanted to really research the expat, the lost generation, of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and it was interesting, and because if you are talking about specific people who actually lived and actually were in Paris, I had mentioned, I'll tell on myself here, and thank goodness for good editors, but and we did play with the timeline of the story. So, when you move one thing, you have to be sure that everything else moves with it. But I did mention an author who was just at a bar with them at the Dingo Bar where they all used to hang out, and the research editor said, "Oh no, he wasn't here at this time. He was in Switzerland or somewhere like that." And I was like, "Oh wow, okay." And so it's small things like that, and I think we both, we pride ourselves on getting those little things right. So basically, what I did is I researched who was where when, and I do talk about Hemingway and his one of his wives, Pauline, Pfeiffer. And I know that she came after Hadley, who was his first wife. And I had to really kind of get that timeline straight, just to make sure, because in the book, Hemingway is just getting ready to marry Hadley. So we don't see that happens off the page, but it is mentioned. So when she first has an encounter with, I'm sorry to say Hadley, I'm sorry, Pauline, he was getting ready to marry Pauline, yes. And Pauline was a correspondent for Vogue. And
woman.
She was formidable. I mean, she's really, just so interesting. And so of course she could have been a real good person for Ivy to know. And she was hoping for that. And so she, when she meets her, but then Pauline ends up getting married, and that's sort of the last that we see. But then some other things change too. So, because she did, so it was fun, kind of researching her, learning sort of like what she wore, what she, how her, haircuts and so forth, what she looked like, and the fact that she did help many aspiring fashion designers, make a name for themselves. So there was that. There was the one of the most fascinating things I learned was about Shakespeare and Company, and how it's started with Sylvia Beach and so forth, and how it changed hands actually. And I learned that she actually, on her deathbed, and I can't believe I'm blanking on the man's name, and I know it just like I know your name, the one who ended up.
It's on the tip of your tongue. I understand.
Yes, and I'll probably blurt it out in just a minute, like But Sylvia Beach opened Shakespeare and Company in a certain area, and then when she died, there was a man who she knew who wanted to carry on the legacy, who had another bookstore. So she actually bequeathed the name of it to him, the name Shakespeare and Company, and that's the Shakespeare and Company that we know of today. So that was a fun thing. And so it was really just kind of looking at how it was then, and so many of these places are still there, or the buildings are still there. What's in it today? Or is it still as it was? And Dingo Bar that I spoke of earlier, it's now an Italian restaurant, believe it or not, but they take pride. The bar is still there and intact and so forth, and they take pride in the history. But right, it's an Italian restaurant, so so who knew?
It's really interesting things about Paris. Since it was occupied, parts of it would absolutely have been potentially preserved to today, as you say, and I think we have a lot of interest in France in the people who are watching right now. So we do have a question about travel for research. Okay. Susan asks, were you able to travel to Paris to research your story, or was your writing and research process impacted by the pandemic?
I'm glad you brought that up, because there's actually a fun story that goes along with that. I've been to Paris many times, and I actually lived in France when I was young. My father was in the Air Force, so I just feel like it's kind of in my blood. But I was not able to go for this book because of the pandemic. But I found what a fun research tool that can really be a good source of procrastination too. I got on Google Earth and actually walked there's a scene in the book when Marla and Hannah first arrive in Paris. I actually got on Google Earth and walked that route. And if you're down on street level, you can see what's on, like what's there. Now, I don't know how current it is. I'm sure it's within, a couple of years, but it really gave me a flavor for the, like the Pigalle area, which is where they end up getting lost and so forth. They're supposed to be one way, and Marla's having bad cell reception. She's navigating, which was one of Hannah's mistakes. She's trying not to be quite so uptight.
Marla may change, but she's still not good at directions. So
she's not. No, she's not. So they end up completely in the opposite direction of where they're going. But it was fun to be able to walk that route and walk in their footsteps. And then there's another scene in the book where they are out walking by the green book stalls that are down by the river. And I actually found a YouTube video. This is another really fun thing, is just get on there. I was amazed at how many walking tours are on YouTube. And that came in really handy, because there's one that goes it goes right by where I imagined. I didn't know it when I was writing the scene, but I'm like, wait, that's exactly where they walk, because you can see Notre Dame in the background and also. So right, the internet is really magical as far as like, transporting you when you can't necessarily go somewhere.
We know we're in good company because when I spoke to our friend Madeline Martin, she said, every mention of the weather is accurate in the last bookshop in London. And you're saying the walking in the book is accurate. You've actually sort of quote unquote walked the streets, although
Right.
I'm sure you've also, walked them in real life as well in a lot
Yes.
of circumstances. But you got on there and you know what those views look like and
You
all.
know it exactly. Exactly.
It's such a fun detail, and I think something that really makes a book feel rich. And to anybody who hasn't gone to Paris, it's wonderful detail. To anybody who has gone to Paris, I think it makes it feel particularly special.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. That's what I was aiming for. So, but there's nothing that says I can't do a follow-up tour. You know?
Absolutely. And if you go to France, everybody's stopping by my flat, apparently. Everybody I interview says they're coming and visiting. So come on down and join the party.
I'll make a reservation so that I can.
We'll talk.
Yeah, right, right.
What were some of the things that surprised you in researching this book? Were there things that really stand out as, I know you've mentioned a couple of stories, but things that really defied some expectations that you may have had about the time, or some of the real life characters that you've written about, or real life people, I should say. They're not characters; they're characters you've
Right, right.
listed
Yeah.
too.
I was really surprised with what I learned about Zelda Fitzgerald. She and Scott Fitzgerald has been and remains one of my favorite authors, but I learned some things about him that weren't so nice.
Complicated.
Where there's I'm sorry, I don't know if you hear my dog barking.
We're very, very pro-pet on this Facebook live stream. You are good.
She's downstairs, but she's she's got some lungs. So, but there is speculation that he may have pulled from her diaries, actually, almost verbatim, to use in some of his work, and she really wanted, she was, and still mostly she's known as the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, but she was an artist in herself. She was a gifted dancer. She was a writer. She was she painted and she did all sorts of things. And I came across some evidence that showed that he I don't know that he purposely tried to keep her down, but because they had it was such a codependent relationship,
Yeah.
where they just really couldn't live with each other, but they couldn't live without each other. Um, and it was a little distressing because, like I said, The Great Gatsby and Tender as the Night and so forth, those are some of my favorite works. And then to think, oh, I wonder if some of these are Zelda's words, so it's so, and kind of learning to just more about her, kind of what, so she was, it's been debated as to whether she was schizophrenic or bipolar, and more people are saying now that we know, more about, bipolar disorder, that's probably what was, what she was challenged with. So.
Yeah. It's interesting bringing up that point. The Beautiful and Damned is one of my favorite books. And, it's sort of, for a lot of reasons, holds a special place in my heart. I think it's a time and place that you read it, sort of thing. And then also some of the stories that you see play out and some of the lessons, shall we say. And
Yes.
if anybody hasn't read that book, I really strongly recommend it. It's pretty extraordinary and takes some good twists and turns.
Yes.
But it's interesting highlighting the fact that maybe he did keep her in a certain box, and whether it was intentional or not, we, of course, it's hard to say in this day and age. But I think it's one of the things that's so interesting about historical fiction that focuses on women's stories. And I know we've talked about this before, how much we care about telling those stories and giving those women a voice when maybe they haven't had an opportunity to have their story told. With Ivy, who's not a real person, but I'm sure there are elements of different people that you've read about and different people even in your own life. Was that something that you were particularly drawn to with creating her story?
With Ivy, I can't necessarily say that I based her on anybody that I had read about. I mean, she might just be an amalgamation of several women of that era, because I did look at first she wasn't British, believe it or not. That sort of evolved. At first she was going to be from New York, and I was going to have her. So I did a lot of research on having her like working at a department store in New York City and so forth, but it didn't line up. And then, there were other considerations too. How did Hannah get to England? Because she was living in England. She was living in London actually, and she was giving Jane Austen to her. So how did she get there? I mean, you kind of, I don't know about you, Julia, in your research, but sometimes I'll come up with these things, and then you kind of have to work backwards to say, well, why does this make sense?
Absolutely.
How does she get there? So it made sense that Hannah came from a family of Brits, basically, that and that they had somehow ended up in Orlando, because that's where I'm from. I'm in Tennessee now. We've been here for about 3 years, but I grew up in Orlando, Florida, actually. So I had the grandmother living in Orlando, and Ivy, you'll see that Ivy ends up in Orlando, and how she ends up in Orlando. So, but it just made sense that she was British, and that they had this love of all things British, because it was their heritage, and she took great pride in passing that on to Hannah. And so Hannah did her master's over in Bristol, and then just sort of happened upon becoming a tour guide for much too long. But so Ivy, I hope I answered your question. Ivy, she kind of shifted, but I feel like she landed in the right spot. And then from there, it was easy to take her to France, of course, or to Paris, of course, because that's where she felt like she needed to be in order to make her dreams come true. So
I think sometimes, especially when we're talking about the books we write, we don't always talk about the sort of early research where you think you're going in one direction, even with a character's backstory, and you sort of do that working back. Okay, if they're here, how do they get there? And you realize that your original plan doesn't work. So you've got to come up with another plan. But the good thing about research and the good thing about writing means that perhaps you can store that away for another day and another book, and that becomes useful at some point. So who knows? Maybe we'll see elements of that later.
You might.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. We have a great question here from Kay, who wants to know, why do you think there's so much renewed interest in the literary expats in Paris in the 1920s?
Oh, that's a great question. It really was an idyllic time, because I was really fascinated with how did we have writers and artists who went over there, and how did they afford it? And quit your job and go to Paris and write, or go to Paris to paint, and worry about the bills later. But it was so economical. I just think it was an idyllic time, especially between the wars. It was a time of really just kind of kicking up your heels, and they were for the most part carefree, and could really focus on their art, whatever it was. But I don't know, especially maybe now with the pandemic, where I think that many of us who enjoy vicarious travel, or vicarious living through other characters. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it does maybe take us to a more carefree time, when they would dance and stay out until all hours of the morning, and just really enjoy themselves and have a good time. And that's pretty contrary to how I even live outside of the pandemic, but I do like to have a good time, but I don't necessarily stay out until all hours of the morning anymore anyway. But I think it's probably just like thinking back to a more of a carefree time when maybe anything was possible.
Yeah, I think it's interesting also because it plays on nostalgia, which,
Yeah.
so much of I think of what all historical fiction authors write, even when we write about difficult things, there is an element of nostalgia and an element of looking back and kind of being interested in things you're interested in. But you also have people in, especially in the beginning of this book, when Hannah is giving Jane Austen tours, who are sort of nostalgic for a fictional world. And there's so much wonderful literary reference in this book. It's like having little book Easter eggs all over the place.
Oh,
So
thank you.
how did you decide what you wanted to include, and sort of give us a taste of sort of the world of the reader as well as the world of these characters?
It was there was a lot to choose from, which was kind of fun. But I I love Jane Austen, of course, too. That's another. So it was almost like this is like my book of little obsessions here, So um, I knew that Hannah was, really the first character who I knew that she was giving a book tour. So, and I knew that I wanted to end up with it being in Paris and exploring that. So the Jane Austen world really sort of represented how Hannah was in the beginning, in being a little staid and a little, a little more formal. And it was like, Jane Austen stayed here, she ate there. Here's, Chatsworth, which was in the movie of Pride and Prejudice, which we all, or many of us love. And so I loved that juxtaposition of the more formal Jane Austen works to the more carefree expats in Paris. But then, just kind of coming down to logistics too, when I was thinking about her tour, which I talk a little bit about, I don't really, there's a scene in her, of her tour, and then she gets pulled into this other world. But I actually had to I did a lot of research on tours and what would be realistic for a tour, for a tour, and those were the things that I named. And then, like I mentioned before, if you jumping over to Paris, I really had to look and see who was in Paris at the time. I really had to look up the timelines for where these people were, because that was another thing too, is they did tend to move around a lot. If you're, my goodness, if I were living, and I hope you're able to do this once the pandemic is over, but you're so close that you can hop on the train and go basically anywhere. You're so close.
You
Like,
can go on a day trip. It's a long day, but it's sort of, I'm from Los Angeles, and it's not dissimilar to sort of LA to San Francisco. A little bit longer journey, but it seems so much closer, and it is so much closer when you live over here. So
right, exactly. It's, things are just right there, so anyway, so they used to do that. They used to go, to different places, and they used to go to, some of them went together, but I needed to keep things pretty centralized in Paris. So a lot of it, the timeline dictated that,
sure.
quite a bit. So
it's been a running theme throughout. As I mentioned before, we're gonna have a party with everybody coming over to
yes.
visit in London, but we have another stop on the tour that's been added. So I'm gonna do a tour of London, which I actually think should be Madeline, and I'm gonna do the gardens, and then you're gonna have to do all the literary sites in Paris. So start brushing up, because
okay.
because it's a thing.
I'm gonna get our tour all together and
Exactly.
channel my inner Hannah. So.
Precisely. So I would love to talk a little bit about what it's like being a debut author for historical fiction in 2021. So what has it been like? Because this has been out for a week, is that right?
Yes, it has. And it has just been, it's fabulous, just incredibly incredible. This book seemed like it was such a long time coming, and because of the pandemic, my release date was moved once. We didn't know when. We were kind of thinking it would be at a certain time, and then I got January, which that would have been, we might have been release, release month
Oh,
buddies
you
anyway.
would have you would have not only been a release month, you also, if you were anywhere near London, we would have been doing release day events together. So
Yes, right, right. Because your fabulous book, the Last Garden in England, was was in January, and then they moved it to April, and of course the April in Paris, it made so much sense, and I was hoping too that the pandemic would be a little more, just that we would be coming to some closure with that. Believe it or not, I still, just because I just got my second, or not just, I'm just now in like full swing. My 2 weeks ago, I got my second dose
yes.
of Pfizer. So yay! So tomorrow I am going to visit my book in the wild for the first time. So
Oh,
venturing out.
that's
So
fantastic. Have you got something that you're going to do to celebrate? Are you going to have a little glass of champagne at some point, or?
yes, absolutely. Oh, but we have, yes, that's my husband is quite wonderful in keeping the champagne flowing. It's so it's been sort of like nonstop. So but it has, I'm grateful because so many people have just been so supportive, and you too, of course, which I really, really appreciate it. We support each other. I would, hope that we will always do that. And but yeah, so I'm excited to go, find my book out in the wild, and take some pictures, and see where it is and so forth. But being it's really, like I said, this book was quite a long time in coming, and just it just, there was a time when it felt like it would never get here, like it was just so far away, and then all of a sudden it's like it's here. So
Feels very like there's tons of time and it's almost too much time, and then it feels like there's not enough time and
there's
it's
not enough
right
time.
now. And why
Exactly.
not so quickly?
So so many things that you want to do, and you're like thinking, oh well, do I do this or do I do that, or what's the best way to celebrate it, and also. And so yeah, so that's been neat. It's also, it's funny because I really did not have a sense of relief once the book was finished. I was sort of like, oh gosh, I'm going to miss living in that world in my head. So, like really, and having a reason to, to research Paris, and to walk around it on Google Earth. And not that I necessarily need a, a reason, but so yeah. So it's just been awesome. And Gallery Books, we share the same publisher and so forth. They have just been magnificent. I can't thank them enough, and also. So right, it's been fabulous.
We always get some questions about what your writing process is like. Do you write every day? I actually don't. We're friends, and I don't know the answer to this question.
I do. Yes, I do. And even if it is a day where I think I just can't possibly write, I make myself sit down and write 100 words, believe it or not. So every single day. And usually that ends up being, especially if I know I can't write and I need to be doing something else. If I'm saying I'm only going to do my 100 words, then it's sort of like, oh, but wait, and then this, so. But I do, and depending on the project, I will set a word count per day. I don't do pages or time, because pages are a little nebulous. You could have, depending on if you're doing dialogue, it could be, you could end up with maybe, 300 words. So I set an actual word count that I need to do. I do write every day, and usually my writing stretches through the day. I'm fortunate to be a full-time writer, and I'm not a morning person whatsoever. So I'm not. So I usually don't get to my desk until about 10:30. And
very reasonable time. I like that.
Yes,
that sounds civilized.
Yeah. Civilized. So then I'll turn on my computer and check social media, do, if I need to, correspond, or if I need to do some housekeeping and that sort of stuff. And then what works best for me is I write in sprints, and I have found there's just something magical about sprints. I will set a timer, and I won't allow myself to check email or answer the phone.
That,
I mean, unless it's of course an emergency,
yeah,
but and it's amazing at when I'm writing against the clock at how much I can get done. So it's, and then as soon as that time's up, I will take a little break and, get up and walk around and then come back, set the timer again. And I know how many sprints I need to do, for how many words I'm trying to do that day. But it really is, it feels productive, so that it's, because we all have those days where, where all writers do, where it's just like the words just aren't coming, or, I'm just not inspired today, because you can't wait for the muse, because if you're waiting for the muse will never visit.
very finicky. Yeah, very fickle.
Yes. Yeah. So that, and then I usually, sometimes I'll work until maybe 6 o'clock. That's a long day for me. And then I turn off the computer and have an evening with my husband, and then get up and do it again. Now, I also, I do write my 100 words. I work that way 4 days a week. And then I allow myself to have a couple of, like actually 3 days off, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but I still write 100 words on those days.
Oh, nice. So it's sort of there are the full working days, and then there are the days that kind of keep the words flowing and ticking over.
Yes.
I
Yes,
like that idea
exactly.
a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's a good one. Do you
and
do a lot of, oh, sorry.
oh no, I was just going to say quickly too, if you think about it, if I'm only dashing off 100 words, that's a page that I've completed on a day where I would have been off. And what I like to say to aspiring authors who think, oh, I can never write a book. If you write 1 page a day, every day, at the end of the year, you'll have a finished book. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. You'll also have a very intimate knowledge of how many words you can write in a day, and also how many words are in a book, which I think you can always tell people who sort of dip their toe in publishing or are full-fledged authors, because they tend to speak in word counts rather
They
than
do, exactly.
and I have to remember that sometimes, even with family members. So I'll say, oh, 103,000 words. And they're like, what? I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means. Right, put that in context,
Exactly. So yeah, it's all very relative. Do you plot your books out beforehand, or are you more sort of writing on the fly?
I am absolutely a plotter. Absolutely. That's my roadmap. And often I won't stick to it to the T, but I have my plot points where I know that I need to get from here to here. And that's what I'm writing in between. It's like, how do I, get from point A to point B? And then again, from point A to point B. Usually have a general roughed out, like what each scene is going to be about.
I do that as well, actually. It's really helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. I envy people who can just sit down and write, but that to me is like just like setting out and just driving, and you have no idea where you're going.
I used to do that, and if it works for you, I think it's wonderful. And I know there are a
Exactly.
couple of people who are authors who typically watch and comment and things like that.
Mhm.
For me, it took me a little while to realize if I do that, I write 40,000 words, which is about half of a sort of 300-ish page book-ish.
Yes. Right.
Um, and then I junk it because I figured out what the book is about. And so I have to go
Exactly.
back and start the story all over again. So when I have that roadmap, it's never, I'm not one of those authors who works off of a really, really strict outline that's really detailed. And some people do, and it's incredible. They can see the whole book in their head beforehand. I do need a little bit of discovery along the way. But if I don't have a map, I tend to just wander for a while and then decide it's really nice wherever I end up, and I'm going to write about that. So
Exactly. But it is nice too, because if you have your plot points, you can go out sightseeing. You know what I mean? You can kind of meander over here and over here, but you have to kind of come, pull it back in, to this plot point.
well, and I've learned at least about myself. I really love the editing process, and I've learned the first draft is hard, and I need to get the story down, and I need to get the characters mostly right, and then that editing draft for me is just, that's where you really get to play around with things. And I was describing it to my father, who was curious about sort of what my writing and editing process is about, because I keep saying I love editing, and he stopped me and he just said, it sounds like you rewrite the first half of your book anyway. And I just thought, oh yeah. Very efficient.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. But a lot of times it's because I realize, so for instance, in my book that comes out in December, I had them sort of going to a whole bunch of parties because it's about debutantes. And the parties are great, but nobody lives on parties alone. We need we need a bit of variety. And I can imagine with this book, you have them going to the Dingo Bar, but you can't just, I mean, that's not the only place that people go. So
No, no. Now Hannah's, oh no, I'm sorry, not Hannah. Ivy's roommate would beg to differ with you. She would love to live there, but
sounds like just having a grand time.
but no. So yes, she actually found it necessary to actually get a job. I mean, and she was having a hard time getting somebody to help her. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So that put some, put a damper on going out all the time too. So it was right. But that was an interesting thing too, because there was, so much has been given to, about how they partied and how, they dancing and drinking and so forth. And, but what else did they do? Because you can't necessarily do that all the time. So, but that's when I had her, walking, had her, kind of trying to think, going, there's one point too where she goes out and she's like, I need to get out and I just need to surely, something is gonna, speak to me here. So, she goes to the Tuileries and she goes to some different, different places in Paris and all, which was kind of fun to kind of delve into those too. So
Absolutely. I just wanted to really quickly say hello to Renee Ryan, who is watching right now.
Hi, Renee. She's another of our Step Into the Story sisters. We mentioned her earlier, so I'm so glad you're here.
Yes, and we're going to be chatting. I can't believe how quickly April has gone, but we're going to be chatting together on Monday. So
Monday.
go and join that Facebook group, Step Into the Story. You'll be able to watch along with even more of us.
Yes, exactly.
What we're talking about this month, but it always touches on research. It always touches on books. It always touches on historical fiction. So it should be a good time. So
yes.
I want to make sure I ask you a little bit about reading, because I think it is safe to say that most authors are usually also pretty prolific readers as well. So is there anything that you've read recently that you really loved, or anything that you're looking forward to that's coming out in the near future?
Absolutely. I have been devouring Fiona Davis's books. I don't know why I was late to the party with Fiona Davis, but I'm finishing. I've read all of hers, and I'm just about to finish the masterpiece, which is the one set in Grand Central, and they are just breathtaking. So, I mean, just so just gorgeous. And it's been a couple months, but I read your book, which I just adored, absolutely adored. And then after Fiona Davis, I'm getting ready. I have Madeline Martin's book, the Last Bookshop in London, queued up to read that one. So that's next. So yeah, there's going from one book to the next book to the next book is, I don't, I read in the evenings, of course, and that's my reward after a long day. But I just wish I had more time to to read everything, all the books.
Well, and it's so hard in a year where there are so many wonderful books coming out, partially because the pandemic moved some publication dates, like you mentioned before, but also partially just because there are so many wonderful books coming out. It just happened to be a great year, especially if you're a historical fiction fan who really loves reading about women in the past. It seems like every week there's something fantastic, or there's many things that are fantastic coming out.
Exactly. In fact, just as you said that, then after Madeline's book, I'm going to read Denny S. Bryce's book. I can't wait to read that one. The Wild Women Get the Blues.
And the Blues.
I'm sorry?
Wild Women and the Blues.
And the Blues. Oh, I'm
a song title.
Terrible with read. Yeah, but it just looks incredible. So I can't wait to read her book too. So
a little bit of a shameless plug. All three of the authors that you've mentioned, Fiona Davis, Madeline Martin, and Denny S. Bryce, all have done Ask an Author interviews. So if you guys go into the announcements tab at the very top of the page, they're all pinned there and you can go in and find them.
So. Oh, good. Well, I did not see the Fiona Davis interview, so I will definitely have to watch that one, catch up on her, because yeah, I know she's been around for a while, but I don't know why she feels like a new find to me. But now I'm eagerly waiting for what she's going to do next. So
it's always wonderful to see somebody get to discover, because an author is new to you so long as you haven't read their book. So
yes.
they could have been around for a while, and then suddenly you find them and you have this fantastic backlist of books that you can dive into. So
Right, exactly. Exactly.
So I know we just have a couple more minutes here. So I do want to make sure I ask, because several people have asked in the comments, which I think is a very, very good sign. They've asked what you are working on and if you can talk about your next book.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. It's a little early to talk about specifics, but I can say that I'm working on another dual timeline book, and it's set present day, of course, and then mid-century, 20th century, and it has a similar feel to Lost in Paris, but it's different.
Perfect. It's a bit of a tease. So
right, yeah.
I assume that if people follow you on social media and on newsletters and things like that, they can find out a bit more information when you're able to talk about it. So would you like to
Absolutely.
tell us where we can find you online?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. I have all my contact information on my website, which is Elizabeth Thompson, Thompson with a P, THOMPSON, author.com. Make sure you put the author in there. ElizabethThompson.com is a very nice realtor in California. so, so make sure you put the author, Elizabeth Thompson, author. And basically it's the same for my social media too. I'm on Instagram and of course Facebook too, and it's Elizabeth Thompson author. So you can find me that way. Or if you just go to my website, I have all the links there. So.
Of course, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for making this part of your virtual book tour with your debut book, and I'm just delighted to see people discover this book already.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I appreciate you having me today. This is so much fun.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for watching as well. We'll be back next week.
Thank you for being here. So thanks again.